It vibrated on Lucas Moretti's marble desk at exactly 10:47 p.m. He didn't flinch. I don't know any flinch. In his line of work, late-night calls were as routine as breathing and mostacilines, and mostacilines that would ripple through the city's dark waters. He let it ring twice before answering. His movements were deliberate, calculated. The number was unfamiliar, but that didn't mean anything. People always found a way to reach him when they needed him. Moretti answered. His voice had an authority that didn't require volume to command respect. On the other end, a brief silence. From a distance, the sound of a siren filtered through the line. Mr. Moretti, this is Officer Reyes from the 11th District. I'm calling about an incident on Corrientes Avenue. Approximately 30 minutes ago, a woman was involved in a traffic accident. Before she lost consciousness, she asked that we contact you. Lucas's expression didn't change, but something moved behind his dark eyes. The city had taught him to expect anything, but this wasn't on any list. The name? Nora Black, sir. She's being transferred right now to the Italian hospital. Her injuries don't appear to be serious, but she was very insistent that we contact her before the ambulance left. The name drifted between them like smoke. Nora Black, aged I. It had been 2 years since she'd heard that name, since she'd seen those sharp green eyes across a table in a coffee shop. That was too bright and too public for the kind of conversation they were having. She was a journalist, then one with enough courage to request an interview with a man most people would only speak of in whispers, not for a story, police report for a profile. She wanted to know who Lucas Moretti was when he wasn't casting shadows that moved markets and men. He accepted because she asked without trembling, without the usual fear that preceded most of her interactions with civilians. She sat across from him with a tape recorder between them and asked him questions that caused him to reconsider answers he'd been giving himself for decades. Questions like whether power was worth the solitude it demanded, whether he remembered what it felt like to trust someone, whether he slept well at night. The article ran in a small but respected magazine. It was fair, uncomfortably insightful, and it portrayed him as something more complex than villain or hero, just a man who had made choices and lived with them. 2 weeks after it ran, Nora disappeared from the world of journalism. Rumor had it that she had taken a job in corporate relations. Lucas knew better. She had left because publishing that article had left a mark on her back, and she was smart enough to recognize it. She was in a hospital now, and had asked for him to be called. Lucas got standing there, buttoning his jacket with one hand while holding the phone in the other. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Make sure she's not left unattended until I get there. Sir, I'm not sure I have the authority to. You do now? He hung up. The drive to the Italian hospital took exactly 18 minutes. Marco, his chauffeur, knew better than anyone when to ask questions, especially when his employer was stepping out of the penthouse. With that particular expression, the one that suggested someone had crossed a line they didn't even know existed. The city passed by on the other side of the tinted windows in flashes of neon and shadow, familiar territory that Lucas had spent 3 decades learning to navigate, to control, to own in ways that had nothing to do with property deeds. He thought about the last time he'd seen Nora. It had been brief, accidental. 6 months after the article, she was emerging from a bookstore in Recoleta, her arms full of novels, her hair longer than he remembered. He froze at the sight of him, and for a moment he saw genuine fear in her eyes. Eyes, not necessarily of him, but of what his presence in her life represented. Lucas nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that contained both greeting and farewell, and kept walking. She deserved her escape. He wasn't going to be the one to drag her back, but now she had asked to be called. Why? The emergency entrance of the Italian hospital was controlled chaos. Ambulances, medical personnel rushing, the hum of urgent care being administered behind closed doors. Lucas cut through it all like a knife in the water, parting the mess with his mere presence. Officer Reyes was waiting for him near the front desk. A young cop with tired eyes who straightened instinctively as Lucas approached. Mr. Moretti is in observation room 3. The doctor says she's stable with mild motion, some bruising. They're holding her tonight for monitoring. The accident. Reyes pulled out a small notebook and flipped through the pages with practiced efficiency. Single vehicle collision. She swerved to avoid an oncoming motorcycle in the currents near the intersection of Scalabrini and Ortiz. He lost control. He crashed into a parked car. The bike didn't stop. We're checking traffic cameras, but so far there's nothing useful. Lucas's jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. The motorcycle? Wrong way, no cameras. No cameras. It was textbook. Clean enough to look like an accident, chaotic enough to be dismissed as the usual chaos of Buenos Aires traffic. Oh. Someone had sent a message, and Nora had been lucky enough to survive the delivery. The motorcycle was deliberate, Lucas said. It wasn't a question. Reyes hesitated a moment, then lowered his voice. Off the record. Yeah, that's what I think too, but we're officially calling it reckless driving and failure to signal and failure. Unless more evidence turns up, that's it? Lucas nodded once. He didn't need the police to tell him what he already knew. He'd spent enough years watching people die in accidents that weren't accidents to realistic accidents to recognize the. What he needed to know was why. What Nora? And why now, after 2 years of silence, did he find her in observation room 3, behind a curtain that offered the illusion of privacy in a space designed for efficiency over comfort? She was awake, propped up on thin pillows, her left arm wrapped in bandages, a small cut above her eyebrow sealed with surgical glue. She looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile, but her eyes, those sharp green eyes, still held the same intelligence that had made her dangerous in the first place. She saw him in the doorway, and something crossed her face. Relief, perhaps, or resignation. You came, he said, his voice hoarse but firm. You asked for me to come, Lucas replied, stepping into the room and dropping the curtain behind him. Across the small space, two people who had shared a meaningful conversation years ago and had since deliberately chosen to stay apart at each other. The silence stretched, heavy with questions neither of them yet knew how to phrase. Finally, Nora broke it. I know this is crazy. I know I probably have 100 better things to do than show up at a hospital for someone I barely know. But when they asked if there was anyone I could call, your name was the only one I could think of that felt safe. Lucas pulled the only chair closer to the bed and sat down. His movements, economical and controlled. Safe is not a word people usually associate with me, yes. No, she admitted. A ghostly smile touched her lips. Ew. But honest, yes. You told me once that you never made promises you couldn't keep. That stuck with me. What's going on, Nora? He studied her. He felt her fingers twisting the thin blanket on the bed. Hospital, the slight tremor in her hands that had nothing to do with the accident. She was afraid, not of him, but of something else. Something that had been haunting her long before a motorcycle forced her off the road. Tell me, what's going on? Start from the beginning. Nora took a shaky breath. Her eyes remained fixed on the sterile ceiling tiles, as if they contained the very answers that she had been searching for. When she spoke, her voice was low but deliberate. Each word chosen with the care of someone who knows that what she's about to say will change everything. 3 weeks ago, I received an envelope at my apartment, with no return address, no note, just a thumb drive stop too. She swallowed. At first I thought it was a mistake. I haven't worked as an investigative journalist in 2 years. No. Not since you interviewed me, Lucas finished. Yeah, she looked at him then, and he saw the guilt there. The weight of decisions made in the name of self-preservation. I took a job in corporate communications, auditions. Sure, boring the kind of job you don't want to do. Makes you follow or threaten. I thought I had left that world behind, but someone thought differently. Lucas waited, Flash drive held files, documents, mostly financial records, email exchanges, photographs. At first I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then I started connecting the pieces. Her fingers found the edge of the bandage on her arm and began to pull at it nervously. It's a web. Politicians, developers, construction companies. They've been running a scheme for 8 years, diverting millions from public infrastructure projects. Bridges that were never fully repaired, schools that used shoddy materials, subway stations that needed renovation and weren't touched. Money that should have made the city safer ended up in their pockets. Lucas's expression remained neutral, but his mind was already processing the implications. This kind of corruption wasn't new. Buenos Aires had been built on handshakes and backroom deals since its founding, but the scale she was describing suggested something bigger, more organized than the usual exchange of favors that greased the wheels of the city. "Why send it to you?" he asked. "If you've been out of journalism for 2 years, there are active reporters who would have been more logical targets." That's what I couldn't figure out at first, until I found it buried in a subfolder as if it had been placed there deliberately in an article I wrote 4 years ago before I interviewed you. It was about real estate development in San Telmo, about how certain projects seemed to be moving at unusual speed through the approval processes while others languished. I didn't have enough evidence to name individuals at the time, but I had suspicions. He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering. One of the men you suspected then, a councilman named Ricardo Vega, is at the center of this network, and in the files they sent me, there's irrefutable, prosecutable. Lucas leaned back in his chair slightly, processing. So someone wants this out? Someone on the inside who either developed a conscience or wants to eliminate competition. That's what I thought too, except she hesitated, and he saw real fear cross her face. Except I also found something else in those files. Something I wasn't supposed to see. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Lucas waited, patient as stone, giving her the space to continue at her own pace. He'd learned long ago that the most important information always came in these pauses. In the things people were afraid to say out loud, there were wire transfers, money moving through shell companies, offshoring accounts. Most of them I couldn't trace, but there were a few transactions with familiar patterns. Bis, beau, fabons. She was looking at him squarely, her gaze steady despite the tremor in her voice. Patterns I recognized from when I investigated you 2 years ago. Not your money, I think, but these are accounts that orbit your world. Legitimate companies that connect to your network. And therein lay the reason she'd called him the real reason she was afraid they'd in. Whoever had sent her those files had deliberately or accidentally included information that tangentially connected to Lucas's operations. Not enough to implicate him directly, but enough to suggest that the web of corruption that had been working for him was the investigative man intersected with her world in ways that made everything exponentially more dangerous. Lucas stood up, walked to the window overlooking the hospital parking lot. Dawn was still hours away, but the city never really slept at all tonight. Even now, deals were being made, debts collected, territories defended. He had spent his entire adult life building an empire based on understanding power dynamics, on knowing when to push and when to back down. This situation required careful consideration. "Did you make copies?" he asked, his back still to her. "Miku." "Yes, password-protected cloud storage. And I told 2 people what I found. My sister, who lives in Cordoba, and an editor I trust." Smart. She was smarter than most gave her credit for. Certainly smarter than the people who had tried to scare her on the road that night. She had created a dead man's switch. If anything happened to, the information wouldn't die with her. It was exactly what he would have done. "The bike wasn't random," he said, turning to face her. "Hux. You know it. I suspected, but I wasn't sure until I saw your face when the officer told you about the accident. A faint smile touched his lips. You have a tic. You know, when you're putting together something dangerous, your jaw does a certain thing. I don't have tics. Everyone has tics. Yours are just more subtle than most. He almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he returned to his chair, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, lowering himself to her level. This is what's going to happen. You're going to stay in this hospital for observation tonight, as the doctors ordered. Tomorrow, when you're released, you're coming with me to a safer place than where you've been living. You're not going back to your apartment, you're not going to your office, you're not going anywhere predictable until we understand the full extent of this thing you've gotten yourself into. I'm not asking you to protect me, Nora said, but her protest lacked conviction. You called me before I went out to the ambulance. That was asking for protection. Whatever you call it, you call. His tone wasn't cruel, but it was absolute. These people tried to kill you tonight with a warning that felt like an accident. Wouldn't have emotion. Next time, they won't bother with niceties. And, Nora, there will be a next time. Unless we figure out who's pulling the strings and convince them that touching you isn't worth the cost. He studied him for a long moment, her journalistic instincts clearly at war with her common sense. Then she spoke, and her voice grew quieter. Why are you doing this? We spoke once, 2 years ago. I'm not your responsibility. It was a fair question, one he'd been asking himself ever since he'd gotten the call. The easy answer was that he didn't like loose ends. That a reporter with information that tangentially connected to his world being murdered would raise questions he didn't want asked. But that wasn't the whole truth, and he found himself uncomfortable offering her anything but that. But not. 2 years ago, you asked me if I slept well at night, he said. Finally, Do you remember what I said to you? You said you slept well because every decision you made was deliberate, that guilt requires regret, and that you had no regrets about choosing to survive. That was still true. But you also asked me something else, off record after the interview was over. You asked if there was anything I wished I had done differently, one thing you would change, if you could. Nora frowned, trying to remember. What did you say? I said I wished I had been better at protecting the people who didn't ask to be involved in my world. The ones who got caught in the crossfire just because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. He looked at her, letting her see the weight of that admission. You wrote something dangerous 2 years ago because you were good at your job. You left that job because my world touched yours and scared you enough to walk away from something you loved. Now someone is trying to kill you. And while I didn't directly cause it, the edges of my world are close enough to what you found that I can't pretend I wasn't involved. So it's fault, it's responsibility, cha. There's a difference. The curtain fluttered and a nurse poked her head in, her expression professional but firm. Mr. Moretti, visiting hours ended 2 hours ago. I've been giving him space, but Ms. Black needs to rest. Lucas stood up, tucking his jacket in. I'll stay outside. Officer Reyes stays at the door until morning. No one enters without hospital identification. Do you understand? The nurse nodded. She had clearly dealt with enough demanding relatives to know when to pick her battles. As Lucas moved toward the exit, Nora's voice stopped him. Lucas turned. Thank you for coming for all this. He nodded once, a gesture that conveyed unsentimental acknowledgement, and left. Out he saw. The curtain fell closed behind him. The leather armchair in the hospital waiting room wasn't designed for comfort, but Lucas had learned to sleep in worse places. He didn't sleep now, though. Zoe. He pulled out his phone and made a series of calls, each one brief, encoded in the language of business that anyone listening would interpret as routine corporate business. Iwisikaluas. By 3 a.m., he had a clearer picture. Vicente, his head of security, had already pulled traffic camera footage from every intersection within a half-mile radius of the crash site. The motorcycle had suddenly appeared in Stream's license plate, removed. The rider in full gear with a helmet that obscured any identifiable features. He had followed Nora's car for 3 blocks before forcing the incident, then disappeared into an industrial area where the cameras were conveniently out of commission. Professional work of the sort that required resources and planning. Tomas, who handled Lucas' more delicate financial affairs, had begun tracking down the shell companies Maura had mentioned. The employers she had recognized were indeed connected to Lucas' network of Vige, though not directly. They were buffer companies of the sort, used to clean money before it enters legitimate channels. Someone was using a similar infrastructure to the one Lucas' organization used, which meant they had either copied his methods or learned them from someone who had once worked for him, and Marco, his chauffeur, who was much more than just transportation, had contacted people in the construction industry, the political sphere, and the parts of city government that really moved things along. Ricardo Vega, the councilman at the center of Nora's files, was well-connected but not untouchable. He had been on the city council for 12 years. Long enough to become an institution. He had enemies, rivals, and a reputation for being corrupt enough to be useful but not so blatant as to attract a federal attention. So far, Lucas apparently synthesized the information with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades making life or death decisions based on incomplete data. The picture that emerged was complex, but not incomprehensible. Someone was trying to take down Vega's network, and they'd chosen Nora as their instrument either because of her previous work or because she was believable enough to make the evidence compelling. The motorcycle incident meant that Vega's people had identified her as a threat, which suggested that they had someone monitoring exactly this specific type of information leak. But here was the interesting part. If they'd wanted to kill her, she'd be dead. The accident was designed to scare, not eliminate. That suggested either incompetence, that Lucas was hesitant given professional execution, or a warning. Someone on Vega's side wanted Nora to know she was vulnerable to go public with what she knew would have consequences. The question was whether that warning was meant just for her or also for whoever had sent her the files in the first place. Dawn came slowly over Buenos Aires. The sky turned from black to gray to the distinct shade of urban blue that suggested the city was waking up whether it wanted it to or not. Lucas watched her through the waiting room windows, his mind already 3 steps ahead, planning contingencies and calculating risks. By the time Nora was discharged at 8 a.m., he already had a plan. Officer Reyes had been replaced by a day-shift policeman whose eyes appeared less tired, yet they were no less wary than before. Lucas ignored him, waiting as Nora signed papers and received discharge instructions that she clearly wasn't processing. When she finally emerged from the infirmary, she was wearing the clothes she had been wearing during the accident: jeans, a sweater that had seen better days, sneakers with a pink mark on the toe where her foot had hit the brake too hard. She looked exhausted, pale, and determined not to show it. "Ready?" he asked her. "For what exactly?" "To disappear temporarily. I have a place in Puerto Madero, a secure building, a doorman who knows how to be discreet and enough distance from your normal life that no one will think to look for you there right away. I can't just disappear. I have a job, responsibilities. You have a concussion and paperwork from a car accident. Call your office. Tell them you need a few days to recover. They'll understand." Nora opened her mouth to argue, and then seemed to think better of it. She was smart enough to know he was right, that going back to her apartment or her office would be walking into whatever trap they had set for her. Lucas could see the resistance in her body language, the way she held herself like someone bracing for a fight. "This isn't permanent," he said, his tone softening slightly. "Just until we understand what we're dealing with. A few days, maybe a week, and then we'll decide how to handle this in a way that keeps you alive and doesn't destroy both of our lives." She considered him, her green eyes searching his face for something. Maybe reassurance, maybe deception. Whatever it was she was looking for, she must have found enough, because she finally nodded. "Okay, but I need to go through my apartment first." Close my laptop. A few things. Too risky. I have the files on my laptop. The whole thing. We're going to need them if we're going to figure this out. Lucas' jaw tightened. He recognized the logic. Marco's taking us. We get in, grab what you need, and we're out. No delays. 10 minutes. Deal. The drive to Nora's apartment in Almagro Iwali took 25 minutes in the morning traffic. Marcos kept checking his mirrors, looking for lines, while Lucas sat in the back seat next to Nora, his phone a constant presence in his hand as he continued to coordinate with his people. The building where she lived was a pre-war building, 4 stories. The kind of place that had probably been fancy in the 1920s and now only clung to respectability through good bones and affordable prices. 3rd floor, Nora said as they pulled up. Apartment 3B. Marco parked directly in front. Engine running. Lucas got out first, sweeping the street with the practiced gaze of someone who had learned to recognize danger in the position of a parked car or the posture of someone pretending to read the newspaper. Nothing set off immediate alarms, but that meant less than it once did in an age where surveillance was digital and threats could be activated with a phone call. Boofs. They climbed the stairs quickly, Nora keeping pace despite the obvious discomfort of her bruised ribs. When they reached her door, she paused. What's wrong? The deadbolt. It always locked. It's not locked. Lucas was at her side in an instant, his hand instinctively going to the gun he kept hidden under his jacket. Stay here. Okay. If there's someone in there, they're gonna have a very bad morning. He tried the knob, pushed the door, opened carefully, stepped into the apartment with every sense on elite. The space was small but organized. The home of someone who valued order, or at least had been. Now books were knocked off the shelves, couch cushions were shuffled, the contents of the drawers strewn across the floor. Someone had searched the place, and they hadn't been subtle about it. Clear, he called out to Nora after checking the bedroom and bathroom. But you have to see this. She stepped inside, and he watched her go through the predictable progression of emotions. Shock, rape, fury. They were looking for the files, she said, clearly. They found them. Now I always carry my laptop with me. She clutched her messenger bag. Always? Protective, he confirmed. Lucas walked through the devastation, analyzing the pattern. The search had been thorough, but unprofessional. A professional team would have left things undisturbed. This was designed to send a message. We know where you live. We can get to you at any time, then. There is no safe place. Take what you need. We're leaving. Nora moved through the apartment mechanically. She grabbed the clothes from her ransacked closet, toiletries from the bathroom, a few personal items that had somehow survived the search. She worked quickly, efficiently. Someone who had learned to pack for unexpected departures. As she pulled a framed picture from the mess on her nightstand, a photo of her with an older woman who shared her features. His hand shook slightly. Your mother? Lucas asked. My sister, Sarah. She's the one I told about the files. Where does she live? In Cordoba. Do you think so? Give me her details. I'll have someone keep an eye on her, make sure she's safe. You can do that from here. I can do a lot of things from anywhere. They were back in the car in 15 minutes, the Buenos Aires skyline growing across the windshield as Marco navigated the traffic. Nora sat in silence, processing everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. Lucas let her be, understanding that sometimes the mind needs stillness to catch up with the body. The building in Puerto Madero was exactly what he had promised, safe, anonymous, expensive, in the way that money can buy privacy. The doorman recognized Lucas immediately, greeting him with the kind of professional deference that suggested he was well compensated for forgetting faces. The elevator ride to the 15th floor was silent, save for the mechanical hum of cables. The apartment was modern, minimalist, impersonal, floor-to-ceiling windows that they offered a view of the Rio de la Plata, furniture in shades, art on the walls that was expensive, but on the walls that was expensive but emotionally neutral. It felt like a place where no one really lived, which was accurate. Lucas maintained several properties like this around the city, safe houses for situations that require discretion. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, setting his bag down on the leather couch. "The kitchen is stocked. There's a bedroom over there, the bathroom next door. The security system is already active, and the building has cameras at every entry point." Nora walked to the windows and looked out over the river. "How long have you been prepared for something like this?" "I always prepare for something like this. The details change, but the principle is the same. Have safe places, people you trust, and contingency plans." He loosened his tie, the first casual gesture she seen him make. "I'm going to make some calls. See what else we can learn about who's behind this." "Should you rest?" "I can't rest. Not yet." She turned to face him. "I know I look like I'm about to faint, and maybe I am, but I'm also the one who spent the last 3 weeks living with this information. I know these files better than anyone. If we're going to find out who's trying to kill me and why, I need to be a part of that conversation." He studied her for a moment, seeing past the bruises and days and the stubbornness beneath. It was the same quality that had made her a good journalist. The refusal to accept easy answers or convenient lies was also what was going to keep her alive, if she was lucky. "Okay," she agreed. "But first, some good coffee. Ghee loaded." She managed a real smile, then tired, but genuine. "That's the best offer I've had all day." The laptop sat open on the glass table between them, its screen casting blue light across the darkening apartment. Ease. Lucas had dimmed the overhead lights, claiming they were easier on the eyes, but Nora suspected he was more comfortable in the shadows. They'd been working nonstop for 3 hours anyway, cross-referencing files she'd received with information Lucas people were sending her in real time, building a map of connections that grew in complexity with each passing minutes. Coffee had been replaced by sandwiches Lucas had ordered to go, and then more coffee. Nora's shock made her head throb with a dull, insistent ache, but she pushed it out, driven by the kind of focused energy that comes from finally understanding the story you'd been chasing. "Here," she said, punching a series of transactions on the screen. "These payments all go through the same company. Middleman. Riverside Development Solutions. On paper, it's a legitimate consulting firm that advises on urban renewal projects. But look at the glitch. Every payment from the city to Riverside occurs exactly 2 weeks before a corresponding payment from Riverside to one of these shell companies." Lucas leaned forward, studying the pattern. Riverside receives contracting payments from the city for consulting work that likely never happens or is significantly overpriced. Then it filters that money through shells before it reaches personal accounts. Classic laundering, just disguised in development speak. Exactly. And Riverside's SEO is Miguel Chen. Lucas's expression darkened. "I know Chen. He worked in legitimate development. He made his money redeveloping properties in flower beds after the housing crash. Then he started moving into more creative endeavors." Creative, meaning illegal. Creative, meaning he learned that building stuff was harder than taking credit for someone else's work. Lucas pulled out his phone, typing out a quick message. "Shen is involved. This is bigger than just Vega and his connections on the council. Shen has relationships with people in my world. Not specifically in my organization, but adjacent, but he's the kind of businessman who thinks that dining with dangerous men makes him dangerous. So, who sent me these files?" Nora kept scrolling through more files, her fingers moving quickly over the trackpad. "If this network includes people from your world, people who probably don't appreciate exposure, why risk leaking it?" That's the question, isn't it? Lucas stood up and went to the windows. The sun was setting over the river, turning the water shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if he'd been paying attention. Someone on the inside wants out, or wants someone else to come out. The information is too detailed, too specific for an outsider to figure out. Whoever compiled these files had access to internal communications. They knew where the bodies were buried, an informant, or someone positioning themselves to take control. In my experience, moral outrage is rarely the motivation for this kind of betrayal. It's usually ambition or fear. He turned to confront her. Tomas has been tracking the shell companies on your list. 3 of them end up in the Cayman Islands, standard practice, but 2 of them, the ones connected to Riverside, lead to bank in Uruguay that has interesting clients. Interesting. How interesting? In that the bank's main investor is a firm owned by Victor Castaneda, Mo. The name hung in the air like a stone tossed into water, with ripples spreading outward. Nora's journalistic instincts immediately flagged it as significant, though she wasn't sure why. Bufferstay. Should she know that name? Probably not, unless you've spent time investigating organized crime families in Buenos Aires. Victor is an old guard, in the business since the 80s. He's not flashy. He doesn't make any head-turning moves, but he controls significant territory in the city's construction industry, Mustiz. He has his hands in unions, material suppliers, waste management, all the infrastructure that keeps buildings standing. So if you're running a scheme that involves city construction contracts, you need Victor's permission, DTN, or at least his cooperation. Nothing moves in the world of construction in this city without someone like him knowing about it. Lucas's ISIS phone buzzed and he glanced at the screen. His expression tightened. Vicente just sent me something. The motorcycle that ran you off the road was found and abandoned in a warehouse in La Boca. Clean, no fingerprints, but the chassis number leads to a rental company owned by Victor's nephew, Bena. Nora felt her pulse quicken. So Victor's people tried to kill me. Either they wanted it to look that way, or they were hired by someone else who wanted to point the finger at Victor. Luku rubbed his jaw, thinking, this is getting complicated. It was already complicated. No, it was dangerous. Now it's complicated, which is worse. Nora saved her work and closed her laptop, leaning back against the couch cushions. Mbas. Her head was pounding, and the adrenaline that had kept her alert was starting to fade, leaving exhaustion in its place. So what do we do? If this is connected to organized crime, we can't just go to the police. The files may be proof of corruption, but they are also proof that could lead to a lot of powerful people being arrested, including people who wouldn't hesitate to kill to protect themselves. We need leverage, Lucas, sitting back down across from her. Right now, whoever sent you those files has all the power. They choose what you see when you watch it, how you interpret it. We need to flip that equation, figure out who sent it, and why. Once we know what their ultimate goal is, we can decide whether to help them stop them or find a third option that will keep you alive and not start a war. Nora studied him in the fading light. This man who had entered her life 2 years ago and then left with equal deliberation only to return when she needed him most. There was something both terrifying and comforting about his presence. The way he treated violence like a business problem, threat assessment like casual conversation. Well, she had spent 2 years trying to forget this word existed, trying to convince herself that she belonged in the safe, boring realm of corporate communications, but she had never quite sigmatirated, had she? A part of her had always missed the dangerous questions of the stories that mattered even if they were scary. Can I ask you something? She said quietly. You can always ask. I choose whether to answer. Why? Did you actually agree to that interview 2 years ago? Men in your position don't usually sit down with journalists, especially not for profiles that might make them seem human. Lucas was silent for a long moment and Nora thought he might not respond. Then he said, remember what you said in your email when you requested the interview? Most journalists start with their credentials, their platform. Why should I care about giving them access? You did none of that. You said, I want to understand how someone builds a life in the shadows while the rest of us try to find the light. But that's what I wanted to know. Not the criminal details, not the tabloid story. You wanted to understand the choice, and you did it better than most. You wrote that I had created a realm of careful compromise, that I had traded the possibility of trust for the certainty of control. You weren't wrong, but you weren't entirely honest with me either. No, he admitted. I wasn't. There are things about my life, my past, my organization that I will never tell anyone. Not because of legal exposure, but because some truths are too heavy to share. They would break you, and I liked you too much to do that. The admission was casual, almost in passing, but Nora heard the weight beneath it. I liked you. I respected you. There's a difference. Yes, I like a lot of people I don't respect. I respect very few people I actually like. You were an exception. Nora's phone vibrated in her pocket, making her jump. She pulled it out expecting another robocall or a spam message. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. The files I sent you were for help. Stop investigating. Stop asking questions or you're going to find out there are worse things than a car accident. This is your final warning. She showed Lucas the screen, watching his expression go from neutral to dangerous in the space of a heartbeat. He took the phone from her hand, scanned the number, forwarded it to someone before handing it back to her. They're tracking you, he said. They simply know you're not in your apartment, which means they're monitoring your phone or they have someone watching you. You can't track the number. Tomas is already on it, but he'll be a throwaway. They're not stupid. He stood up and went to what looked like a closet, but turned out to be the apartment security system room. Within seconds, he had pulled up the building's entrance cameras, looking for anyone who looked out of place. The building is clean. No one followed us in here, and no one is lurking outside. But that message came within 15 minutes of accessing those files on your laptop. Do you think the laptop was compromised? Or the phone? Or both? It doesn't matter. We were careful, but clearly not careful enough. He pulled out his own phone. Another call. Vicente. I need a clean device delivered to the Puerto Madero location. I also require a technical team to perform a security inspection. Both within the hour. When he hung up, Nora asked him the question she'd been avoiding. Who are we fighting? Lucas Vega's people, Victor Castaneda. Someone else entirely? That's what we're gonna find out, but right now, we need to assume that everyone is a threat and no one is an ally, no one. He returned to the couch, sitting closer to her this time, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. I know this isn't what you signed up for when you answered that call tonight, but you're in now, whether you want to be or not. The question is whether you trust me enough to let me handle this in my own way, which is aggressive, direct, and probably illegal by most conventional standards. Ideas. His dark eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her understand why men feared him and why he had risen to power in a world where weakness was fatal. I don't play defense, Nora. I don't wait for threats to materialize and then react. If someone wants you dead, I find out who it is and make sure they regret making that decision. But doing it my way means you have to trust that I know what I'm doing, even when it feels like I'm making things worse. She should have been terrified. 2 days ago, she would have been. But sitting in this expensive anonymous apartment with a man who had built his life on violence and control, Nora was strangely calm. Maybe it was the shock, or maybe it was the realization that she had already crossed a line that she could not uncross. She had called him instead of a friend, instead of her family. She had known somewhere deep down that what she needed was not comfort or sympathy. She needed someone who understood power and how to wield it. Okay, she said finally, we'll do it your way, but I'm also not going to pretend that I can live a safe and secure life while people who do bad things control the narrative. I became a journalist because I wanted to tell real stories. Stories that matter. I've been running from that for 2 years. Maybe it's time to stop. Lucas nodded, and something in his expression changed. Respect, perhaps. or the recognition of someone who had finally decided to stop lying to himself. "Oh, we start tomorrow. We should have you rest tonight. Doctor's orders, remember? In you. I'm going to make some calls. Speak to people who might know more about Victor's recent movements. If he's involved in this web of corruption, someone in my circles will have heard rumors. And if not, we'll take a more direct approach to finding answers." Nora didn't ask what that meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to know yet. The bedroom was dark and quiet. The kind of manufactured silence that came from being 15 stories above street level with triple-paned windows blocking out the constant hum of the city. Nora lay in bed, still fully dressed, staring at the ceiling and trying to convince her body to rest. Her head was pounding with a dull, insistent rhythm that the painkillers had only partially muffled. And every time she closed her eyes, she could see the motorcycle coming toward her. She felt the awful lurch of losing control. She was almost dead. The thought kept coming back, undeniable and terrifying. If only she had been going faster. If the car she had hit had been a tree instead of a parked sedan, if she hadn't instinctively turned the wheel at just the right moment. There were a dozen ways this accident could have ended with her in a morgue instead of this safe house. Eyes. Through the door, she could hear Lucas's voice, low and measured, speaking in Italian to someone on the phone. She didn't know the language, but got the tone. Authority, command. The kind of voice that expected obedience, and usually got it. It should have scared her. It was strangely comforting. The oral evidence that someone was actively working in order to keep her alive. Eventually, exhaustion overcame anxiety and she slipped into a thin, restless sleep filled with fragmented dreams of documents burning in flames, numbers that wouldn't stay still long enough to read, and Lucas asking her questions she couldn't answer. She woke to the light of dawn filtering through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was, why her body ached as if she'd been hit by a truck. Then it all came flooding back. The accident, the hospital, the ransacked apartment, the threatening message. Nora sat up slowly, her ribs protesting the movement. The bedroom door was ajar, and through it she could see Lucas sitting at the dining room table, his suit jacket draped over the chair beside him, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He was working on his own laptop, his face illuminated by the glow of the screen, and even from this distance she could see the tattoos running up his forearms, intricate patterns that likely held meanings she would never understand. She had noticed them during the interview 2 years ago. She had asked him about them. He had given her a non-answer, something about personal history, and she had been wise enough not to press the issue. Now, watching him work in the early morning light, she wondered about all the questions she hadn't asked. All the stories written in ink and scars that he kept hidden beneath expensive clothing and careful control. "You're awake," he said without looking up. "There's coffee in the kitchen. I made it 10 minutes ago." Nora stepped out barefoot, finding a mug already set out next to the coffee maker. The coffee was strong and black, exactly what she needed. She poured a cup and returned to the living room, settling into the armchair across from him. "What time is it?" 6:30. Vicente's team went through your devices last night while you were sleeping. You were right about the laptop. Someone installed a keylogger that's been transmitting everything you type to an external server. Your phone is clean, but they recommended replacing it anyway. Nora's stomach sank. So whoever's behind this knows everything I've accessed, every search I've done, every file I've opened for the past 3 weeks. Yeah, which is actually useful. How is that possibly useful? Because now we know what they know, and we can use that, and we can use that. He finally looked up from his screen, and she saw that he'd been awake all night. There were shadows under his eyes, a tightness around his mouth that suggested that ran on coffee and willpower. I spent the night mapping the timeline of your investigation against external events. Every time you opened a specific file, something happened in the real world. When you first access the files on Victor Castelleda, one of his legitimate construction businesses suddenly announced a major contract. When you spent 3 hours reading emails about Ricardo Vega, Vega made an unscheduled trip to La Plata to meet with provincial officials. They were reacting to what I was learning. More than that, they were trying to get ahead of it, which tells us that whoever is monitoring you isn't just interested in stopping you. They're using your research as an early warning system for their own ends. Nora processed this, her journalistic mind immediately seeing the implications. The person who sent me the files and the person monitoring my research might not be the same person. Exactly. We have at least 3 players in this game. Who leaked the information? Who's trying to keep it buried? And possibly a third party that's using the chaos to advance their own agenda. Lucas turned his laptop so she could see the screen. It showed a complex network diagram, names and companies connected by different colored lines, warnings. Here's what I'd mapped out so far. Red lines are confirmed financial connections. Blue lines are political relationships. Green lines are suspected criminal ties. The diagram was dizzying in its complexity. Ricardo Vega was near the center, connected to a dozen different entities. Miguel and Riveride Development had their own cluster of connections. Victor Castelleda was there too, his name linked to so many other nodes that he looked like a spider at the center of a web. But what caught Nora's attention was another name, one she recognized from the files but hadn't paid much attention to until now. Elena Strand. Who's Strand? She asked, pointing at the screen. Deputy Chief Executive Officer for Development and Housing. She's been in that position for 6 years, longer than anyone expected her to last. Generally considered competent, occasionally accused of being too collusive with developers, but nothing that's really stuck. It's in my files, not prominently, but it's copied into a lot of the email exchanges between city officials and Riverside. I know, I saw it last night. Lucas zoomed in on the Strand section of the diagram. What's interesting is what's not in your files. Strand has connections to Victor Castelleda going back 15 years, before either of them were particularly powerful burmis. They served together on the board of a non-profit urban development organization, Miamhaishan. They did some legitimate work together on affordable housing initiatives. Legitimate. How far can I tell if what makes her very clean or very good at hiding dirt? He closed his laptop, leaning back in his chair. I have a theory, but you're not gonna like it. I haven't liked anything about this situation so far. What is it? And Strand sent you the files. Nora almost spat out her coffee. The deputy mayor, why would she expose her own network of corruption? Because maybe it's not her network. Maybe she's been watching Vega and Chen and the others operate for years, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to burn them all by. Lucas stood up and went to the windows. The sun was rising over Buenos Aires, now turning the glass towers into spires of gold and fire. Politicians at her level don't last by being passive. They last by being strategic, knowing when to make moves that eliminate rivals and consolidate power. If Strand wants to rise, and everyone at her level wants to rise, she needs to clear the path. Noe. Taking down a web of corruption she was never officially a part of would make her a hero. It would also remove potential obstacles to her advancement. But if she sent the files, why would her people try to kill me? Why monitor my research? Maybe they're not her people. Maybe Vega's side figured out what was going on and decided to send you a warning before things got too far. Or maybe. He paused, considering. Maybe Strand sent the files but didn't expect you to dig as deep as you did. It gave you enough to hurt Vega, but you found more. You found the connections to Victor, the money laundering infrastructure, the full scope of the operation. That's more than I could handle. I want it exposed because it implicates her by association even if she was never actively involved. Nora's mind raced, pieces fitting together into new configurations. So the warning wasn't to stop investigating the corruption. It was to stop investigating beyond what I wanted you to find. That's my theory. But it's only a theory until we can confirm it. How do we do that? We set a trap. We make Strand think you're going to publish everything you found, every connection, every name, every transaction. We put pressure on him to either commit to protecting you, which would confirm that he's not behind the threats, or escalate against you, which would confirm that he is, and if it escalates, then I'll take care of it. The casual way in which he said it, as if taking on a deputy prime minister who might want her dead were merely another item on his list of things to do that morning, should have been absurd. But Nora was beginning to understand that in Luca's world, threats were simply problems with specific solutions. She'd spent decades in an environment where excitement meant death and half measures meant weakness. She didn't think about danger like normal people. She calculated the risk, assessed the resources, and acted with the certainty of someone who had survived by making the hard decisions before anyone else even acknowledged that there was a decision. "Okay," she said, "what's the plan?" "You write a real, well-researched, documented article with names and everything. Everything you found in those files, plus everything we've discovered since. But you don't publish it, and you send it to Strand first with a message saying you're giving him 48 hours to comment before it goes public. Yeah. That's suicide. The moment he knows I have everything documented, he has to make a decision. Either work with us to control the narrative, or try to stop us. Either way, we'll know who we're really fighting." What about Victor Castaneda? If his name is in that article, he's not going to wait 48 hours to respond. Victor's not going to see the article. We're going to make sure of that. Lucas's phone buzzed. He looked. Tomas had just confirmed what he suspected. The shell company that received Riverside's largest payments is owned by a holding company that is owned by another holding company that eventually leads to an entity registered in Elena Strand's maiden name. Nora felt a chill run through her. So he's not just covering up corruption, he's directly profiting from it. They're all tainted. Nora, the question is, are they tainted enough to kill? That's why he looked at her and she saw the seriousness there, the weight of what he was about to say. If we do this, there's no going back. Once we start pushing, people are going to fight back, and they're going to fight back hard. You need to be absolutely sure you want to take this path, because I can't promise you'll come out the other side the same person you are now. Nora thought back over the last 2 years to the job she'd probably taken, the story she didn't stop telling, the part of herself she'd buried because being brave had become too dangerous. She thought about her ransacked apartment, about the threatening message, about the fear that had been her constant companion since she opened those files. But she also thought about why she had become a journalist, the belief that the truth mattered, that exposure could be a weapon against the powerful, that someone had to be willing to tell the stories that everyone else was too afraid to touch. "I'm sure," she said. "Let's do it." Lucas nodded, and for the first time since she had woken up in the hospital and seen him standing in her doorway, he smiled. It wasn't a warm, comforting smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just committed himself to the house. And so we began writing the article. It had taken 12 hours to write, edit, and document. Nora worked with the focused intensity of someone who knew that every word mattered, that this wasn't just journalism, it was a weapon, being forged with care. Lucas sat beside her for most of it, offering suggestions that revealed a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of how to construct a narrative that was both legally defensible and maximally devastating. "You're good at this," she said at one point, watching him restructure a paragraph to strengthen its impact while eliminating anything that could be construed as speculation. "I've spent my life understanding how information moves, how it hurts, how it kills. This isn't all that different from what I normally do. Just use words instead of other tools." By 8 p.m., they had a draft. It was devastating. 23 pages documenting the web of corruption in meticulous detail, with financial records, email exchanges, and photographic evidence supporting every claim. It named Ricardo Viga, Miguel Chen, and 6 other city officials as central players in a scheme that had siphoned off more than 40 million pesos from public infrastructure projects. It detailed how Reverse's development solutions had operated as a front for money laundering, how shell companies had been used to obscure the true recipients of city contracts, and how political favors had been exchanged for cash payments disguised as consulting fees. And finally, almost as an afterthought, it mentioned Elena Strand not as a participant, but as someone whose office had been copied in numerous email exchanges and whose financial disclosure forms showed connections to entities that had received off-contract payments at. The implication was clear without being explicit. Strand had either been complicit through inaction or had directly benefited from the scheme. "That's perfect," Lucas said, reading from the final version. "It gives her the space to position herself as either ignorant or a victim, but it also puts enough pressure on her that silence is not an option." Olension. The article was sent at 9 p.m. to Elena Strand's personal email, which Tomas had acquired through methods Nora chose not to ask about. The message was simple. "Deputy Chief Strand, I think you'll recognize some of the information in the attached document. I plan to publish this story in 48 hours, but as a courtesy, I'm giving you the opportunity to comment or provide context before publication. You can reach me at this email. Nora Black." "Now we wait," Lucas said, closing the laptop. They didn't have to wait long. 23 minutes later, Nora's new phone, the clean one Vicente's team had provided, rang with an unfamiliar number. She looked at Lucas, who nodded. She answered on speakerphone. "Ms. Black," the voice. The voice was feminine, controlled, professional. "I'm Elena Strand. I got your email." "Deputy Chief, thank you for calling. Let's skip the formalities. You've been given information that is partially accurate, but dangerously incomplete. Publishing what you sent me would harm innocent people and serve the interests of those who leaked those documents to you. So, do you know who leaked them?" A pause. "I have suspicions. Would you mind sharing them?" "No, over the phone. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow morning, somewhere public, outwardly summit. You can bring anyone you want as security. I have no interest in threatening you, Miss Black. I have an interest in making sure you understand what you're really getting into." Nora glanced at Lucas, who was already typing something on his phone. She showed him the screen. "Okay, but name the location out loud." "Okay," Nora said. "Tomorrow at 10 a.m., the lobby of the Mariano Moreno National Library on Agustin Alva Alvarez. It'll have to be public enough for you. In situ? See you tomorrow." "Miss Black, I hope you're working with someone you trust, because the people who are investigating, they don't have the luxury of awareness that you and I have." The line went dead. "You know you're not alone," Nora said. "I'd be stupid not to, me. The question is, do you know it's me specifically?" Lucas stood up, flexing muscles that had been still for far too long. "But it doesn't matter. We have a meeting, which means we have her attention. We need to decide what we want from her. I want the truth. I want to know who sent me those files and why. You want the truth. I want to make sure whoever tried to kill you understands that trying again would be very costly for them. Those aren't necessarily the same goal. So what do? We go to the meeting, we hear what she has to say, and then we decide if she's someone we can work with or someone we need to expose us." He turned to face her fully. "But Nora, you need to understand something. Once we sit down, we either commit to a specific path or we make a deal that keeps you alive, but may involve compromising what's a part, or we burn everything and accept the consequences. So there's no middle ground in situations like this. I won't compromise the story, even if it means putting you at greater risk. Even then, Sue." He studied her for a long moment, and she couldn't quite read what she saw in his expression. "You're either braver than I gave you credit for, or stupider. It often doesn't make much difference." That night, Nora actually slept. Exhaustion finally overcame anxiety. When she woke at 7 a.m., Lucas was already awake, sitting at the dining room table with coffee and what looked like a full security briefing displayed on his laptop. He'd changed clothes at some point. Another suit, still expensive, still perfectly tailored to conceal the weapon she now knew he was carrying. Vicente will be with us today, he said as she left the bedroom. He'll stay back, out of sight, but close enough to intervene if anything goes wrong. Marco is driving us. And I've arranged for 2 extra people inside the library to be positioned where they can watch the entrances beam. This is all really necessary. It's necessary until it's not necessary anymore. I don't take risks with people I'm responsible for. I'm not your responsibility. You called me before I got to the ambulance. That made you my responsibility. There was no way to argue that logic, mainly because she said it with such absolute certainty that debate seemed pointless. They ate breakfast, croissants and more coffee, and went over what they knew once more, making sure they had memorized every detail. Lucas insisted that she leave her phone and laptop behind. They would only take the hard copy of the article and go in as clean as possible. The trip to the library was quiet. The morning traffic of Buenos Aires provided a white noise that filled the silence. Nora watched the city pass by through the windows, thinking about how different everything looked now compared to just 3 days ago. For a few days since the accident, 3 days since her life had been threatened, her apartment ransacked, her careful bubble of security finally burst. She should have been terrified, channel. Instead, she felt strangely calm in the way she imagined soldiers must feel right before going into combat, not without fear, but embracing fear, channeling it into focus. The Mariano Moreno National Library was exactly what Nora had expected. Busy, public, filled with tourists and students and people who had no idea they were about to witness a meeting between a journalist, a crime boss, and a deputy prime minister conspiring over corruption. They arrived 10 minutes early, taking up positions near the main reading room where they had clear lines of sight to all the entrances. Ella Strand arrived at precisely 10 a.m., walking with the confidence of someone who owned the space she occupied. She was in her early 50s, dressed expensively but not ostentatiously, with the kind of professional appearance that made you think competent before anything else. She saw them immediately. She registered Lucas' presence with a slight widening of her eyes before her expression returned to neutrality. "Miss Black," he said, extending his hand. "And Mr. Moretti, I should have guessed, Deputy Chief." Lucas didn't stand, didn't offer to shake hands, gestured to the chair across from them. He wanted to talk. "We're listening." Strand sat down, placing his own phone face down on the table, a gesture of good faith that probably meant nothing. "I'll be direct. The files you received, Ms. Black, were sent by someone inside my own office. The junior assistant named Marco Chen, Miguel Chen's nephew, has been gathering evidence for months but not out of any moral conviction. He is being blackmailed by someone we have yet to identify, someone who wants to use his article to set off a cascade of investigations that would benefit them politically or financially. So he's saying that everything in those files is true, but that I'm being manipulated." Nora kept her voice level, journalistic. "I'm saying the truth is complicated. Yes, there has been corruption. Yes, Vega and Chen and others have been stealing from the city. But I've had no part in it. I've been documenting it, building my own case, biding my time to take it to federal investigators who might actually do something about it. Your article being published now would alert everyone involved and give them time to destroy evidence and disappear. It would also destroy my investigation. Why should I believe you? Because I can prove it." Strand pulled out a flash drive and placed it on the table. "This contains evidence I've been gathering for 3 years. Recordings of conversations, original documents, witness statements. It's more complete than what you have, and it's all admissible in court. I can give it to you, let you verify everything I'm telling you, but I need you to hold your story for 2 months. By then, the federal investigation will be ready to move, to make arrests that actually stick. Lucas leaned forward slightly and Nora saw Strand tense in response. An instinctive reaction to the approach of danger. And what do you get out of this arrangement? You get to be the deputy prime minister who exposed corruption instead of the one who is suspected of enabling it. I get to advance my career without it weighing me down. And I get to make sure the people who are actually guilty go to prison instead of just getting fined and moving on. And what about Marco-chan? The nephew will be arrested along with his uncle. Blackmail won't get him out of having a hand in the cover-up. Strand's expression hardened. I don't protect traitors, Mr. Moretti. I thought you were? I would appreciate that. The three of them sat in silence for a moment, sizing each other up. Nora could sense the tension, the unspoken calculations going on beneath the surface of the polite conversation were a negotiation, but not just about information. It was about power, about who would control the narrative, about who would win, and who would lose when it all came crashing down. I need to verify what's on that flash drive, Nora said finally, and I need to some of my sources make sure what you're telling me matches what they know. Musapteno. You have 48 hours after that. I need your answer. Strand stood up, setting the flash drive down on the table. Miss Black, I hope you understand that I'm trying to help you. Going public now would make you a target for everyone involved in this scheme, not just the people who've already tried to harm you. Waiting gives you protection, federal protection if necessary, or time to clean up loose ends. If I wanted her dead, she would be dead. The statement was delivered without malice, just as a fact. Mr. Moretti, she understands how this works. Sometimes the best way to stay alive is to know when to be patient. She left without another word, disappearing into the crowd of library visitors. Nora took the flash drive, turning it over in her fingers. What do you think? I think he's telling part of the truth. Maybe even most of it. Lucas stood up, scanning the room automatically before gesturing for her to follow him. But I also think he's playing his own game, and we won't know all the rules until we're too far in to turn back. They returned to the Puerto Madero apartment, where Tomas scanned the flash drive for malware before opening any files. Alice. It was clean, surprisingly, and contained exactly what Strand had promised. Years of carefully compiled evidence, witness statements, recorded conversations. It was the kind of documentation that could bring down not just Vega's network, but half a dozen other corrupt operations across the entire city. Not just against Vega, but against everyone. This is unbelievable. It's also dangerous. If this information is out there, people will kill to keep it from becoming public. Lucas read over her shoulder. Mia. His thoughtful expression was offering to let you break this story when the time comes. That's no small thing. So you think we should trust her? I think we should verify everything she gave us, cross-reference it with what we already know, and then make a decision based on evidence rather than hope. He sat down next to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. The solid presence that had become oddly comforting. But Nora, I also think you need to accept that no matter what happens, you're going to make powerful enemies. People who won't forget that you cost them money and freedom and power, yemunt power. I know that, you truly know that, because understanding it intellectually and living with it are two different things. I can protect you from immediate threats, but I can't protect you from the long-term consequences of destroying people's lives. That's a burden you're going to carry forever. She turned to look at him, really looking at him, seeing past the expensive suits and the controlled calm to the man underneath. Is that what you carry? The weight of all the choices you've made, all the people you've hurt every single day. Most nights I sleep well, but there are some that I don't. His dark eyes held hers. You asked me once if I had any regrets. I said no, and it was true at the time. But you made me think about it differently. You made me wonder what kind of man I would be if I had made different choices, and I would probably be dead. The world I operate in doesn't reward awareness. It rewards strength, certainty, the willingness to do what others want. But meeting you reminded me that there are people who choose differently, who have the courage to be vulnerable in ways that I never could in kid. That's worth something, maybe worth more than what I built. Nora felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of the moment they shared. This wasn't about the investigation or the threats on her life anymore. It was about two people who had accidentally collided 2 years ago and then deliberately avoided each other, both understanding that what lay between them was too complicated to examine closely. Now forced together by circumstance, they could no longer avoid it. Lucas' phone buzzed. Another message from an unknown number. We saw them at the library. Strand is lying to you. There's no federal investigation. He's buying time to eliminate evidence and witnesses. Publish now, or he'll make sure nothing is ever published. Attached is a photograph. Alina Strand, taken from a distance, meeting with someone Nora didn't recognize in what looked like a covered parking garage. Lucas took the phone, examining the image closely. Thomas, I need facial recognition on this person. Send it encrypted. He looked at it. This changes things. Who's sending these messages? Yes, it's Marco Chen. It's not Chen. Chen is being blackmailed. Remember, he's not the mastermind, just the source. Someone else is orchestrating this, using both you and Astrid as pieces on a chessboard we can't fully see yet. Unat. The phone buzzed again. Tomas' response came quickly. The person in the photograph was Victor Castaneda's lawyer. Nora felt cold. Why would Strand be meeting with Castaneda's lawyer? No. Either he's dirtier than he's letting on, or he's trying to make a deal. Involve Victor in whatever deal he's negotiating with the federal government. Immunity. In again for testimony, perhaps reduced charges. Or is he working with him to make sure the investigation never happens? Or bost poliodonosotomness. That too. They sat in silence, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on them both. Every piece of information seemed to contradict the last taste. Every potential ally revealed as a potential enemy. Winnie. Nora felt exhaustion creeping up on her again, the shock still affecting her more than she cared to admit. What do we do? She asked quietly. Lucas stood up, going to the windows again. It was late afternoon, the sun now beginning its descent over the River Plate. We do what we should have done from the beginning. We stop trying to figure out who to trust and start assuming everyone is lying. We fact-check everything. We don't believe. And we make our decisions based solely on what we can prove. Malukam. Into us. After that we publish the full truth. Regardless of whatever deals people are trying to make behind the scenes. Moans. We let the chips fall and deal with whoever comes after us. He turned to her. But fair warning. If we do this, if we truly commit to exposing everyone and everything, it's going to get violent. Not right away, maybe. But eventually, people with so much to lose don't accept defeat gracefully. Nora thought about the last 3 days, about everything that had happened since that call in the hospital. She thought about the life she had been living for the last 2 years. Safe and small, and ultimately meaningless. She thought about why she had become a journalist, about the belief that the truth mattered, even when it was dangerous to tell. Then I guess it's time to stop being safe, Lucas said. He smiled that predatory smile again. Now you're speaking as someone who might actually survive this. They worked through the night, verifying every piece of information on Strand's flash drive, cross-referencing it with the original files, building a complete new picture of the web of corruption. By dawn, they had something unprecedented. A fully documented, legally bulletproof espousal that implicated dozens of people at multiple levels of government and the corporate structure of Buenos Aires. It was the story of a lifetime. It was also a declaration of war. At 6 a.m., Nora sent the article to 3 major publications simultaneously, along with all the supporting documentation. She had written a note explaining that she was publishing despite pressure to delay, that she believed the public deserved to know immediately what its officials had been doing with their money and trust. And then she and Lucas waited for the world to explode. It took 4 hours. By 10 a.m., news sites were breaking the story. By noon, officials were resigning. By 2 p.m., federal prosecutors were announcing investigations. By sundown, Ricardo Vega had been arrested. Miguel Chenuia del País and Elena Strand were giving a press conference stating that she had been building her own investigation all along. Nora watched it all from her Puerto Madero apartment with Lucas by her side, both of them understanding that this was just the beginning. The story had broken, but the consequences would take years to fully unfold. "Thank you," she said quietly as the sun set over Buenos Aires once again, "for everything. For coming to the hospital, for keeping me alive, for helping me finish what I started." "Did you ask me to come?" Lucas replied. The same words he had said 3 days ago in that hospital room that made it my responsibility. Is that all it was? Responsibility. He was silent for a long moment. "No," he said, "it wasn't." She turned to look at him, and there, in the fading light, surrounded by the consequences of the story they had just unleashed upon the city, Nora Black and Lucas Moretti finally stopped acting as if the bond between them was something simple, certain, or easily explained. She had once been told that some debts could not be repaid, that some bonds could not be broken, and that sometimes the person who answered your call in your darkest hour was not who you expected, but was exactly who you needed. The city remained indifferent to their story, but for 2 people who had found each other in the midst of a crisis and stuck together through the chaos, everything had changed. Not into something easier, but into something real. And in a world built on lies and careful compromises, real.